Speaking of launching into the future, it is my pleasure to invite Mr. Arthur Chua, CEO of Goldbell Group, to kickstart the first of our many fireside chats. Arthur, please join me on stage.
What's the modern?
And once again, remember, we're going to leave the last 5 to 10 minutes, as much of that time as possible for your questions. So do have them coming, get them ready to be answered. Arthur, welcome.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Arthur.
Before you start, I had a few glasses of wine, so be easy on me.
I think that lubricates the conversation even better, right? We can get more morsels of truth from Arthur. Now, Arthur, we know that you're very passionate about mobility trends and gazing into the future. So share with us, what are some mobility trends you observe right now, and how would they play out?
Yeah, I would say compared to the last decade, where buzzwords like disruption, from the rise of ride-hailing players like Uber, Grab, Gojek, these were buzzwords over the last decade or 10 years ago. Today in mobility, I would say it's more of a maturity in the implementation of mobility. Maturity. And examples, of course, the most apparent would include adoption of electric vehicles, more advanced infrastructure that supports autonomous, more commercially viable enablers that include like teleops, cybersecurity, quantum computing. So as an infrastructure overall, the mobility trend going forward looks more commercially viable. That's
right. So certainly some of these technologies that once upon a time would have been a pipe dream will be more feasible in the next 5 to 10 years or earlier. Yes. What are some of these trends that you are most excited about?
Okay, so I think mobility is an extremely complex area to understand. Extremely complex because there are multiple stakeholders involved. Firstly, there are the users. So users of mobility, people like you and us, or commercial companies, we desire an inclusive, affordable, convenient transport system. So this would include business models like mobility as a service, transport modes like multimodal, and all this, right? And even green. So consumers want green today. Then there's a second problem that's called what I categorize as technology. So the technology stack for mobility is extremely complex. Mobility covers connected, autonomous, shared economy, and electric. So technology stacks again include enablers like quantum computing, V2V, V2X, LiDAR, radar for autonomous, and of course batteries and hydrogen for electrification and green energy. So that's the second problem. Please bear with me here.
Absolutely. So consumers, technology.
Yes, and the last part, government. So like what Mr. Jeffrey Xiao shared just now. So government, they have to consider not only local legislations, launching autonomous and considering safety, for example. They have to consider as well international standards that include maybe the Geneva Road Traffic Act. They have to consider stuff like that and also consider urban planning. So how urban cities are planned in future, rural-urban migration, resident-centric journey planning, polycentric town planning. In the whole mesh of things, multiple considerations, and long answer to a very long explanation to a short answer is, I don't have a bet on what to invest or do next in the future, but just a lot of complications, and we just have to weave through all the multiple stakeholders.
Well, we hope you were giving us one of those bets so that we can all jump on the bandwagon. But you do talk a lot about polycentric towns, shorter commutes, more frequent commutes, as well as car sharing. Are you bullish that car sharing will eventually replace car ownership? I know we have some car companies.
I'm not sure if there are any vehicle OEMs seated in the audience. We do have some partners that manufacture vehicles, but I'll share my very authentic view. It depends a lot, firstly, on, of course, the government's motivation for a car-like society. And government's motivation generally would be productivity of the land use, lesser roads for lesser cars, more roads for more houses, recreational activity, stuff like that.
That's right.
So motivation, that's one. Related to this would then be urban planning. And as you shared just now, one of the holy grails for urban planning that Mr. Jeffrey is very familiar with is what I call polycentric town planning. So imagine what polycentric town planning actually means is, how do you create a city within a city or a town within a town? People work, live, and play within this township. You can have leisure activities, you can work here, you can go to school here. And as a result of this township planning, which is very often defined as the only sustainable way for urbanization. So in such a kind of township, the number of trips a day are very frequent, but the number of trips a day are much shorter. So when trips are frequent and trips are shorter, generally it encourages different modes of mobility, one of which is car sharing. You don't have to travel long distances anymore. Multi-pick, multi-drops, car sharing would be one of the mass adopters within such a planning concept. One last point I just wanted to leave with you is, there was a survey done for the youth like yourself between age of 18 to 35 in June 2022. 70% of respondents of the younger generation mentioned that they think that cars are pollutive to the environment.
Very aware.
Something else they said is 61% of them actually mentioned that they believe that car sharing is much more economical as a mode of transport compared to car ownership. So I hope that the younger population gets a bit more mature and older much faster, and Blue SG can proliferate more within smart city towning concepts.
Absolutely. And thank you for calling me young. I'm actually past that youth category. That was very kind of you. So more living, fewer or shorter travels, and certainly cleaner travel. Where do you see GoBell positioning itself in the midst of all these changes?
I believe that GoBell has built over the years, thanks to colleagues here, Kelvin, Waihun, Jean, and Gilad, the fundamental blocks of giving ourselves an unfair advantage into the future of mobility. The unfair advantage, right? And let me just go through some building blocks we created. The first is what we call the reality check. So GoBell, very simply, 40 years of core business in the traditional mobility space. We have 3 venture builds successfully scaled outside Singapore, 1 in 8 countries, over the last, I would say, 6 years, and successfully investing in mobility over the last 5 years. So venture capital, venture building, and a core business. That gives us the reality check. The second pillar that we have is, of course, Move SG. We have accelerated 70 companies over the last 3 years in 20 countries. We have corporate partners, and I hope I don't miss out any name here, energy players that comprise of like Shell, Total. We have infrastructure partners like Singtel, Alstom, PSA. We have tier 1 partners like Continental and Bosch. We have smart city or transport operators like Avis Budget, SMRT, ComfortDelGro. So collectively, we build up this ecosystem that allows us to understand what are the future trends they are looking at, as well as our partnerships with trade and investment authorities in Canada, UK, France, Hamburg, again, with the legislative insights. So as a whole, fundamental blocks to that unfair advantage we're trying to create.
Absolutely, and we do know that you have diversified, right? It's building upon your core business. Now, since we are on the theme of future cities, we know that the future of smart cities is literally already at our doorstep. Take a look at Oceanic Sustainable Floating City in Busan, South Korea, or even Neom City in Saudi Arabia. They're trying to build up a mega city in the middle of the desert. So, you're a visionary. Imagine you have a crystal ball in your hands now, Arthur. Gaze into that ball, and it's year 2035. What does Singapore look like?
I think, okay, Jeffrey has left the room, but I think I wouldn't be able, I would be overly presumptuous to assume what the Singapore government is looking at.
What do you think it's going to look like, or hope it will look like?
Definitely, what I call resident-centric journey planning. Okay, resident-centric journey town planning concepts. You know, people used to build cities, then build the road infrastructure and mobility. So going forward, it's quite obvious that the government does within mobility while considering a township planning. You know, polycentric town planning is something the government is thinking of. But there's one thing that I do observe going forward. It's called a city that never sleeps. I would call that a 24-hour sleep, a 24-hour city, a city that never sleeps. Because of flexible working hours, people will be able to move around the city freely, and that's how a city functions, right? It doesn't sleep. Yeah.
That's right. And again, right, just building upon the Gold Belt picture, in that 2035 Singapore, which is polycentric, which is fast-moving, where do you see Gold Belt, you know, continuing your tradition of pushing the envelope? How far beyond your core business will you continue to venture?
Yeah, I was just asked this question over lunch. I would, before talking about where the vision would be, I talked a bit about the unfair advantage just now. One thing I would say is that the analogy I have now for Gold Belt is we ran probably 19 kilometers over a marathon race, so we are less than halfway there. Our legs are a bit tired. We don't know where we can reach, or how long are we going to take to reach the end of 42 kilometers. So we need some cheerleaders along the way. And seated here are our partners, including the government, so cheerleaders to please cheer us on to complete the race. And that final end point, to be very honest, it's been evolving all the time. One of a very interesting, or two interesting concepts that I saw recently was a partnership between energy management, pre-scene management, mobility, and infrastructure. So this kind of partnerships could bring mobility to the new heights. I'm not sure how involved Gold Belt would be in the smart city planning space. And I've also seen a very smart gentleman from Israel recently that has built multiple townships that accelerated cybersecurity, food tech, and he actually combined venture capital, startups, as well as property within a whole business plan concept. So these are things that have been evolving that I noticed.
Right, and to be truly a smart city, there is, as you say, the interplay of different technology partners, manufacturing, right, and government, of course, and legislation coming together. Well, another part, to be a city that truly never sleeps, we need the help of automation.
Yes.
Now, we know the future of our world is going to be very intertwined between humans, robots, automation. And we know that with your venture built in X Square, you have been active in that automated warehousing solutions. Why is it that, however, why is it that more businesses are not adopting AGVs, AMRs, and solutions like that?
So before answering your question about automation, we have been talking about a city that never sleeps. As a side note, I read recently an article that analyzed the correlation between GDP per capita and the number of hours of sleep.
I see. Right. Tell us more about that research.
So what was interesting is, of course, it's correlated that the higher GDP per capita, the higher number of hours of sleep. And ranked number one is a country with...
Sorry, the higher GDP per capita, the more hours of sleep or the less they get? The more they get, okay.
People get more affluent, quality of life increases, right? So the highest GDP per capita and the highest number of hours of sleep, top of the chart, is a country with three colors. It's blue, yellow, and red. Will you be able to guess the country? Blue, yellow, and red.
Blue, yellow, and red. Somebody help me here. I don't want to boss it up.
Three colors.
Anyone who's great with flags?
Unfortunately, it's not France. It's the Netherlands. But Singapore, very uniquely, has a high GDP per capita, but hardly sleeps.
Exactly. So is that good or bad for us?
I mean, just to tie into the question about sleeping, right? A city that doesn't sleep. So what will be interesting is, in a city that doesn't sleep, what I actually mean is activity continues on, but people are sleeping. People are sleeping, but activity continues on. And for activity to continue on, you need automation.
That's right.
Okay.
So why then? So assuming more of us would love to have at least 7 hours of sleep and not 3,
Yes.
why are more businesses not adopting robotics and automation to help
Okay.
them sleep better?
Yeah. Let me tie in this to our experience in the X-Squared. So briefly for the audience, X-Squared is an autonomous forklift company that also does warehouse optimization that was eventually built by Goldbell 3 years ago. We built a kit. When you mount the kit on a manual forklift, it becomes autonomous. We have sold it to large MNCs, Carton and Etsy, Coca-Cola, GSK, and the likes. And what's very interesting, it's multiple repeated orders. By having repeated orders, it actually shows that the autonomous equipment or the autonomous concept actually works. If not, there wouldn't be a second order, third order, fourth order. One customer did, I think, 5 orders, right? So 5 orders. However, unfortunately, the adopters are large multinational corporates. The main problem that I saw with, I would say, local enterprises are their risk adversity. The capex required for an autonomous equipment is much higher. However, the payback period is 2 years. But because they're scared to take a leap of faith, to pay for that higher capex first, reap the returns in 2 years and enjoy for the next 6, 7 years, that's been a barrier to entry. I think this is one of the greatest reasons why it's been slow.
And it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem, isn't it? Because if they don't invest in that, they don't get more productive, and they won't then be able to take advantage of all the productivity gains,
Yes.
right? And then invest in future capex. So how do we break or lower some of these barriers to adoption, especially for SMEs? Or perhaps even what is
Yes.
Gobel doing to make it more palatable and feasible?
Yes, I'm aware that the Singapore government actually already subsidizes a significant amount of automation for SMEs. So I think that's a good work. One thing I did speak with the team about is to come up with a leasing program to allow the customers to actually test the forklift first. It works, then decide to buy the forklift and do the capex, right? So these are some of the, I would say, solutions.
I think that might work. So they test, they see for themselves the wonders, and then they commit to it.
Yes.
Now, assuming we manage to bring down some of these barriers to adoption, where do you envisage the greatest growth in automation and robotics for the future?
I think the tipping point would be when labor scarcity becomes an even more enlarged problem. And, people generally do not desire to be in a monotonous environment doing the same job function every day and higher skilled workforce that the government always looks forward to. So when labor costs start to increase, labor scarcity becomes a problem. When the government has even more stringent policies about foreign quota controls, this problem would then lead to the tipping point of mass adoption for automation.
Like you said, our Gen Zs are very self-aware, sustainable Gen Zs, definitely
Yes.
want something more interesting to do as well, and technology will liberate them to do this.
Yes.
Now, we have been speaking about, for example, automated warehousing, forklift solutions. Where else do you think will push the envelope when it comes to robotics and automation?
Robotics automation, this is just my belief, right? I'm not absolutely sure, but I do think automation in the airspace, including drones, would be something. Hello? Thank you. Would be something extremely unexpected. Many years ago, I didn't really believe in drones. Until today, still a bit apprehensive. But why I do say that automation within the drone space could be exciting is because the airspace is not encumbered with legacy. The road space is encumbered with legacy of how people move around, how roads are already being built, traffic lights and congestion and all the kind of stuff. The airspace is a greenfield. Airspace is a greenfield. It's maybe easier to actually control how autonomous drones move within the airspace freely, as long as you can have invisible roads within that airspace. That could be something interesting.
That's true. So it's blue skies for the taking. So does that mean we could maybe expect to see Goldbell enter into the space of drones for logistics?
this was the first time someone asked me this question, so I would have to defer to my partners because it's a unanimous decision within what we invest in. So
So we'll
I
take
would
this
have to
conversation
ask
offline.
if my partners do agree with that hypothesis.
And then at the next Move SG Summit, we'll ask you the same question again, right? After you have conferred with your partners. Wow, so I only have one question left for Arthur, and I'm going to throw it open to everybody. Please have your questions ready. So finally, you certainly, like you said, you're still running a marathon. You think you're only halfway there. By the time you retire as CEO of GoBell, age 65 or beyond, with a glass of whiskey in your hand, what do you hope to have said would have been your proudest achievement?
Something very authentic to you is, I hope the retirement age is 45. That
Live
leaves
more, right? Work less.
that leaves me 5 years. Not, that leaves me 5 years. Leaves me 5 years. And one very strong reason is I do believe that at every generation, the thinking changes a lot, and it's better to leave the vision of the company to the next generation. You know, I asked a friend, a very successful businessman. I'm sensitive of time, but I just remembered this. He built a successful business, right? I asked him, do you build a business to last, or do you build it to sell? He gave me a very good answer. He said, building a business to last and building a business to sell is the same thing. And I asked him why. He said, when you build a business to last, you are making it last beyond yourself. And once a business can last beyond yourself, it's naturally ready to sell. I thought that was, yeah. But anyway, your question, sorry, I forgot the question.
Well, all I remembered is you want to retire by age 45, 5 years from now, and clearly you are here to build a business that lasts so you can sell it off to the next generation.
Yes. So the whiskey thing. So what would I be? What would that success look like? That end goal? I would say, you know, my mom nags at me a lot for drinking whiskey every evening, and if she comes to me and she says, gives me a pat on the back and says, "Well done, Arthur, you deserve that whiskey," I think that would be nice. And if my dad unsurprisingly comes to me and my brother and say, "Well done, you did a better job than me," I think that would be a nice thing as well.
Wow, okay, so let's hope you earn that glass of whiskey or more. Someone give Arthur a drink. I think he needs another one. Well, okay, so I'm ready to take questions from the floor. Are there anyone here live at MBS with a question? We'll give you some time to think through. I'll take one from our online guests. Yes. Arthur, someone has asked, are there any pain points or disablers related to connectivity with the environment that are not solved by today's communications means? So are there any pain points related to connectivity that have to do with the environment?
Very honestly, this is not a space I'm extremely familiar with. I do definitely see improvements in connectivity, next-gen connectivity. One thing that I was repeatedly reminded by the team is an advancement in orbital satellites, right? That could further enhance communication. So that is something that I do believe will further improve connectivity. So orbital satellites connectivity, in terms of pain points today, I don't actually see it, but what I do see is the need to have a collaboration between multiple stakeholders, multiple players. Only when you have this kind of collaboration, when I say multiple stakeholders, it refers not only to telcos, but the other players within a smart city space. And if people look at co-creating something rather than having that individual benefit for their business, that really will enhance the advancement of mobility.
And I think for that, we actually need next generational thinking and leadership as well, right? That goes beyond, say, one generation of leaders, because it takes a while to bear fruit. Any questions from our guests here live? A rare chance. Remember, Arthur is going to retire in just 5 years, so we have 5 years left to ask him your tough questions. Or are we cutting him some slack because he said so at the start? He had a few drinks. Well, anyone? Questions? Yes, please. A gentleman in blue.
Hello, my name is Andy. I also run an incubator for deep tech. Is there any problem out there that you see in your space that doesn't have a solution yet that you are very excited to see some solution built around just to get the conversation going.
Does it have to be in the mobility space or anywhere?
No, anywhere that,
Okay.
That we haven't seen, the question is where we haven't seen technology breakthrough. Okay. It's not good for my business, but I think autonomous tech is many, many years away. And the problem actually comes from not simply the technology itself, but whether the government is ready to launch autonomous technology. Right? As I mentioned just now, safety concerns and international standards. Right? All this has to be considered before launching an autonomous technology within a city. So why it's not good for the business is because typically when you have autonomous technology, the income stream is very different from my business. My business is distributing, selling, and leasing commercial vehicles and equipments. So that autonomous tech, I think, is going to take very long. But one thing that, as a technology that has not commercialized very successfully, is something I would call teleops. Teleops is someone behind the wheels, someone far away, driving the vehicle, rather than autonomous itself. So this is what I actually meant by potential commercializations of an idea of autonomous that is more realistic. So for teleops, it depends a lot then on a country's wages and a country's definition of what is the required infrastructure and safety to launch teleops. Example, can a driver only drive 3 vehicles a day? How many hours can a driver drive a day? Do you need 2 or 3 telcos in case one of the telco loses its network? Can the vehicle still move? Teleops itself could be supplementary to one of our business called Blue SG, where the vehicle drives to you, you pick up the vehicle, you drive it to your next destination, you drop it off, and the vehicle drives itself to the next person. So this is an example of why I say that technologies are getting, or mobility is getting more readily commercialized today, in a more pragmatic sense. I hope that answers your question. But not that we will invest in teleops. I'm just saying that that's something to the business.
Thank you for your question, Andy. We have another question from the floor here.
Can you hear me?
You're good.
Okay. Since Arthur mentioned this point about teleops, I was just wondering if I can just contribute to the conversation a little bit. I'm from Ostrom. We do autonomous driving. So we have done a few projects, say, in the driving range, for example, and in a theme park. I think the problem of autonomous driving in Singapore, to my mind, is not that the regulator is not, or is very conservative about it. But I think realistically, we have to do it in steps.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. We do absolutely agree that it takes many experimental steps to get there to the quantum leap of transformation.
One question, if I may ask, is this. The difficulty of advancing that technology towards urban mobility or mobility as a service is the whole ecosystem that supports the technology. So my question for Arthur is this. I know you run Accelerator, I know you support the ecosystem, but how do you choose between encouraging a local startup and just buying technology from overseas?
Thank you for that question.
From the customer point of view, why don't I buy from overseas? Because it is cheaper and more established.
Right,
when
absolutely. Thank you for that question.
Yeah.
Sorry, I have to cut you off. Apologies for that because we are running out of time. Actually, if Arthur, you would like to take that last question, and it actually coincides with what someone is asking online, which is, what is the key criteria that GoBell would use to make an investment into a startup?
So to answer 2 questions very quickly, investing in a startup and using a startup to commercialize within the business are 2 separate considerations. One is a financial return, the other one would be helping the core business. Just one thing I wanted to leave is, it is absolutely not true when many people think that Singapore companies or Asian companies are less superior and more expensive in technology. That was very rarely my experience. It's always the grass is greener on the other side. So that's one thing. Second thing I also wanted to mention is that definitely for companies which have established themselves a longer time overseas would have much more experience. If the launch of a technology is highly dependent on the number of years of experience, example, autonomous, that I wouldn't play with. I would go for the guy that has much longer years of experience. But if a technology is if a technology's consideration for a company, it's closer partnership, on the ground customization, closer relationships, closer customizations, that I would choose someone that's not too far away. So it really depends on the considerations. Because many times companies that are large, experienced, and big overseas may not have the bandwidth or even the commercial motivation to customize for you to the local root conditions.
Thank you so much. I know we wish we had more time with Arthur, but that's all the time we have for our discussion today. Thank you so much, Arthur. Thank you for all of your questions as well, and I'm sure we can continue this conversation later on. Thank you once again,
Thank
Arthur.
you.
Right.